editor-in-chief of IO9, and I was here last year at this awesome festival talking about my book, Scatter, Adapt, and Remember, which is about surviving a mass extinction, and a big part of it dealt with alternative energy, which is why I'm super glad to be back this year to interview Nate Lewis, who is an expert on alternative energy. He is a professor of chemistry at Caltech. He was named a, what was it, a culture changer by Rolling Stone. He's intervening in culture in an awesome way, according to Rolling Stone. And he's associated with a research project at Caltech, which also has an arm up here at Berkeley, called the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis. And that's what we're going to be talking about a lot today, is what that's about and where we're going to be going in the future with solar energy. So welcome and thanks for being here. And so why don't we start out by kind of giving people the lay of the land when it comes to solar technology. So tell us a little bit about where we are now with solar technology and where the work that you're doing at Caltech fits into that.
Great. It's great to be here and to share with you some of the exciting things that are really going on. Solar photovoltaics now are still on a tremendous cost reduction per year. They're coming down at 15 or 18% per year every year for the last 20 years, and not so much an end in sight. So there's a lot of room at the bottom to go. They're the second fastest growing renewable other than wind in absolute terms. And so we'll see more and more of it, and I think many people have now gone solar panels on their roofs. So from a technology viewpoint, that's a success story. On the other hand, there is a gap, and the technology gap is that, well, we have a little problem with this intermittent source 93 million miles away. It stays on all the time, except that the Earth turns. And in case you didn't notice, he that cannot store shall not have power after 4.
I had never heard that phrase, but so basically storage is this huge problem that we have right now with, I mean, as any of you who have solar may have noticed, you know, at night you can't be really relying on your photovoltaic panels to be generating energy. So what's the next step? And tell us about what you're working on and how that's going to fix the storage problem.
Right. So this is really the big elephant in the room waiting to be uncovered. It's small penetrations, and we now, as a country, make about 0.1% of our electricity from solar. So that's fine, and we can grow maybe 1 or 10%. That would be fantastic. But still, if you want to actually build a clean energy system out of intermittent renewables like wind and solar, you have got to find a way to have storage. Not only for a few hours for the night, but just think about the 1 or 2 cloudy or rainy days, and then it's 36 or 48 hours of storage. So we've got to find a way to have massive grid-scale storage. The other big gap in a clean energy system is in carbon-neutral transportation fuels. And I don't mean those for our small light-duty vehicles that we could electrify. It's for the ships, heavy-duty trucks, and ain't no such thing as a plug-in hybrid airplane. But we've got to find a way to use irreplaceable transportation fuels and make them carbon neutral. So the idea is the biggest energy source by far known to mankind is the sun. More energy from the sun hits the earth in 1 hour than all the energy consumed on our planet in the entire year. Nothing else comes close. 10,000 nuclear reactors is what that one nuclear fusion reactor in the sky does for us all the time. But if you can't store it, then you can't do anything with it in the big picture. And the most dense way to store energy is the nucleus of the atom. The second most dense way is in chemical bonds. That's what nature does. Nature figured out the inevitable technology is take the sun and then store it in chemical bonds in plants. We just got to do that more efficiently and make a fuel humans can use, not this lignocellulose stuff. So that's the goal.
So tell us what that means in a practical sense. Like, you know, the initiative that you're working on is about artificial photosynthesis. So what are we talking about when we say, well, we want to have these chemical bonds, we want to store energy in that way? What does that mean? Like, what's the machine that we get at the end of that?
Exactly. So the problem with the nomenclature is that it conjures up images that were, if you build an artificial leaf, that it looks like and works and thinks like a leaf. And there's no reason.
Which would look really cool.
But it probably won't work very well.
No.
And so birds fly with feathers. We built aircraft out of feathers, but we learned that flight was possible, right? So in that spirit, we know it's possible to do the functions of taking the input of sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide and get the output of chemical bonds as a fuel. We don't want to design it like a bird with feathers. It would look more like a high-performance rain jacket, multi-layers. In the top layer, you would wick in water from the air, maybe a sprinkler system like AstroTurf, and sunlight, and then you'd wick out through the bottom layer the product, either a liquid or a gas like hydrogen, or a liquid like methanol or gasoline. And the intervening layer is the black solar absorber that has the magic special sauce that also makes fuel and not electricity. So you just roll it out. No these panels, no wires with lots of high voltage and high current, and you make energy that you can store and use whenever you need to, and you're not at the mercy of the sun and the clouds.
So basically what we're talking about is something, does it look sort of like a solar panel with a bucket underneath that's collecting liquid, or what is that, how does it actually?
It's like a slip and slide. You roll out. Absolutely. It's what I said, a high-performance rain jacket.
Awesome.
We have stuff that looks like that already at small scale. We have little pieces of plastic that you can roll and unroll, and they wick up water vapor from the air and sunlight, and they split water into hydrogen and oxygen right now in our labs that work.
So basically, you're taking in sunlight and water, you're putting it through this slip and slide, and you're getting liquid fuel.
We get gaseous fuel right now, but we want to get liquid fuel soon.
Right. So right now you're getting gases, and of course we already have a whole infrastructure for storing gas in this country and throughout the world. And so, and the goal would be to get liquid.
So actually, we're agnostic about that too, Berkeley, but you know, we don't really care from a technology viewpoint whether or not we have a magic solar carpet gizmo that splits water into hydrogen, gas, and oxygen, or whether or not it directly takes water and sunlight and carbon dioxide and makes a transportation fuel. Because in fact, if we make hydrogen, all the oil companies know, and all the chemical companies know how to take hydrogen and already make gasoline out of it at an energy almost neutral way. We could also upgrade biofuels and double or triple their energy content and make biodiesel in a much more energy-rich form and make plants more productive by upgrading them, so-called, with the hydrogen. So just because you make up front one fuel doesn't mean that's the fuel you'll use at the pump, because we already know how to take crude oil or something else and make gasoline out of it. That's what refineries do at global scale.
So we're talking about technologies that are in the lab right now. And can you take us on a journey into the future? Like, say this technology matures in the way that you hope it will. What will that look like? Like, what does it look like in the United States? Instead of having oil fields, what do we have to generate this fuel?
So, if we take the efficiencies that we've demonstrated, which are already 10 or more times that of the fastest known growing plant, then that means that solar fuel refinery looks in between in size a biorefinery and an oil refinery. Because in an oil refinery, the energy is already in the crude that you put in. You can't beat that. But you make all the CO2 when you're done. On the other hand, a biorefinery is so inefficient, you have to cover very large land areas to feed a certain amount of fuel into your processing system. So it would be in between those. 10 times smaller or more, the footprint of a biorefinery would be the amount you need to make the equivalent fuel. Now that also means, though, that we shouldn't be fooled here. It's unlikely that we're going to get such high mileage vehicles that you'll be able to power your car and your home just from covering your roof. So we're going to need a mix of distributed generation and of large or central generation, just like we do with all energy systems now.
So I might have solar fuel generators on my roof, but I'd also be drawing from some kind of solar fuel energy producing place.
You wouldn't even know it. You wouldn't even know, because if we make natural gas, it would go to the gas pipeline. If we make gasoline out of it, it'll go to the gas station. You won't have to do anything different. The beauty is you can feel green, you can be green, and you won't have to do anything different than you do now, because it's a drop-in fuel into the existing infrastructure.
So basically, we could be living in a radically different future that's carbon neutral, and it might look really similar to where we're living now.
Well, that's the whole goal. In fact, I think that's probably the only way we can actually get from here to there. If it looks radically different, then the infrastructure, the transition time, the capital needed to do that on the time we have left is just a scary thought that we would actually be able to do all that. So easing that and only making one transition up front and leaving everything else the same is just so a lot more pleasing and probably a lot more beneficial that we can pull it off.
Much more realistic, instead of digging everything up and replacing the entire infrastructure. So one of the things that I find intriguing about your work is that you're dealing with solar energy, and yet a huge part of what you're doing at the Center for Artificial Photosynthesis involves chemistry and materials science. It's a very interdisciplinary area. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of the ingredients in one of these solar fuel generators? Like what all is going into it, and what are the devices that you're inventing to create these new technologies?
Sure. Let me tell you first a little bit more about the human ingredients that you referred to. JCAP is a wonderful project that our country should be doing more of. It's sponsored by the Department of Energy. It's a big bet. It's $25 million a year for 5 years. We're in our 4th year now. We made a lot of progress, and we think we'll get another shot to go faster, better, cheaper in the next round. And it didn't fragment the funding into lots of individual laboratories all around the country, working on small ideas that could grow, but that are unlikely to merge into the big idea fast enough. So this is really nucleated, and because of that funding, it ties together chemists, material scientists, physicists, people writing hardware code and building prototypes, all in one facility, all not thinking about 30 different projects. This is their one project that they live and breathe. So we have a goal, and we have a little space shot going here, and I think we should reward our scientists with having those goals that we pay a tiny, tiny fraction of the $2 billion a year we spend in energy. This is $25 million. It's not even a rounding error in what we do to change our country. So what we do is we actually already have demonstrations after 3.5 years of working on this that have taken this idea from a pipe dream into a reality. We've got small-scale laboratory demonstrations that show that we can split water into hydrogen and oxygen with sunlight, and then also have a route to make a liquid fuel. What we don't know yet is that there are 3 things we want. You want them to be cheap, last a long time, and be efficient. You could have any 2 of those, but not the 3rd at the same time. If it's cheap and efficient, it doesn't last. If it's cheap and lasts, it's not efficient. If it's efficient and lasts, we can't afford it. So that's our bogeys, but we know it's possible. And so now we're trying to make them faster, better, cheaper. The ingredients are borrowed from nature. Just like when humans built airplanes, they borrowed flight principles from nature. So we actually borrowed a design principle. We wanted to make our structures, our semiconducting light absorbers, look like trees, because trees do photosynthesis. They do it in a special way. They have a very long axis to absorb the light, and then they move the carriers in the nutrients sideways over a very short distance, the diameter of that aspen tree. That's a great design principle. because then you don't have to move these excited, very fragile electrons through lots of defective material back all the way up to where the light came. So we build these nanoforests, just like nature did to absorb the light. We build 2 of them, one on top of our plastic, one on the bottom, because unlike a solar panel, if you get more voltage and less current, it's the same power as if you get less current and more voltage. If you make a fuel, you have the first law of thermodynamics that you have to obey. And in high school, we probably all remember you needed a battery to split water and you needed 1.23 volts or more. If you had 1.22 volts, you got nothing because you need thermodynamics on your side. So if we don't have 1.23 volts or more, we get nothing. So we have 2 little wires hooked up like batteries in a flashlight in series to give us the voltage we need. And we're smart. Nature uses 2 chlorophylls, one in photosystem 1 and one in photosystem 2. They're the same color. And that's not a great design, because then the light that's absorbed by the one can't make it to the other. So the top material absorbs only the blue parts of the rainbow, the high energy light, leaving the red to go to the bottom material so we can get it all for all the energy it's worth. Then we infiltrate these rods with our liquid and sprinkle catalysts on the top and the bottom. The catalysts on the top make oxygen, the catalysts on the bottom make our fuel, and the piece of plastic keeps them separate so they don't explode. Good design principle.
Yes, that's the best part of any design, the part where it doesn't explode. Unless you want it to explode.
No, chemists like explosions. That's why we're chemists.
Yeah, no, it's true. So it sounds like what you're describing is a machine that's actually an improvement on what trees can do. You're actually absorbing much more light than trees are. And you're not wasting it by growing a tree. You're sending it all. I mean, not that it's a waste of your trees. I'm super excited about trees.
But you bring up an excellent point. It is a conceptual design improvement in the same way that aircraft flies faster and farther than a bird can with feathers. So the engine that we use is, in principle and in practice, over 10 times more efficient at converting sunlight into stored something than you could ever do from the real photosynthetic natural system. The other important point is the real photosynthetic system, the biological one, was never really designed to be an energy conversion machine. Plants have lots of other things they have to do. They have to build their entire other infrastructure. The photosystem, too, only lasts 30 minutes in the sun. And a lot of nature's energy is spent rebuilding that protein so that it can keep lasting for longer than it would bleach and decay in this radical damage environment. And we don't have that problem either. So we don't have to spend a lot of the energy just to stay alive, where at universities we call this overhead. We have a low overhead process here on an energy viewpoint. That's also really beneficial. The third point is the light absorbers, we can leverage a lot of the advances that we see in photovoltaics. We can use combinations of existing materials in new ways to make fuel, so we don't have to, in this case, reinvent the feather or the wheel. And we can leverage on a lot of those advances that are screaming fast around the Bay Area, for instance, and incorporate them with some modification as the engines of our devices.
So before we open it up to questions, do you have a sense of when I can buy one of these? I know that's a hard question to answer, but is there a sense of a time horizon? Like, is it 10 years? Or?
Energy, first of all, in the big picture, energy technology is not like information technology. It's a much slower generation time, typically 40 years, 30 years from introduction of something until you get to the scale of making a lot of energy. So if we did it in half that time, that would be a heroic accomplishment. We started this conception to practice 2 or 3 years ago. We have our first proof of concept now. The next 5 years is faster, better, cheaper, and optionality in the kind of fuel. And only then can we really consider scaling it up into something that not only you could buy, but if only a small fraction of the people buy it, we haven't made a lot of energy. So the goal is 10 or 20 years to really be material, and the reason I have that goal is because our planet's on a ticking time bomb here, and in 40 years, if we don't fix the problem, there's nothing left to fix. So we've got to do this in the next 20 years. No way otherwise, right?
Yeah. And I just wanted to say that there is a part of the JCAP lab up here at Berkeley. You can get tours. You can look it up online. It's JCAP, J-C-A-P at Berkeley. And they do have working prototypes. I've seen them. It's really amazing to go in there and just see, yep, we are taking water and sunlight and generating gas that could be fuel. It's really incredible. And the facilities are gorgeous. So anyway, I want to open it up to questions. We have about 4 minutes and 15 seconds.
Because it's the end of the day,
So, yeah.
Oh, hi. What you're talking about is so brilliant. It's awesome. And my question has to do is you described the input and how much more sustainable the input is than what we have now with fossil fuels. So what I'm wondering is the output, this liquid gas, I'm assuming it has to be flammable or something to somehow get the energy out of it. And what's going to be the result of that combustion, or however you're going to get the energy out of it? Is there still a problem with pollution and et cetera on that end?
Okay, so to be clear, this is what we call a carbon neutral cycle. If you think about the simplest cycle that doesn't involve carbon, the input would be water and sunlight, and then the output is hydrogen that then you burn or put in a fuel cell with the same oxygen to make the same water. You haven't added or destroyed any carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. If you convert that hydrogen either in situ or if you make gasoline, the exact same principle applies because the CO2 came from the air and the sunlight with the water to make that carbon that then you combust and then remake that same exact number of carbon dioxides. So there's no net increase or decrease in the amount of CO2 emissions as a result of this. If you make the same fuel, then you won't know the difference. So if we made the same gasoline or diesel fuel, you have exactly the same SOx and NOx and catalytic converter issues we have now, but none of the net CO2 emissions that you would otherwise have. That's the driving force here, because it's the carbon emissions that are going to make this the valuable technology relative to cheap natural gas from fracking that, even though it's abundant, still is a greenhouse gas emission that on our planet, soon enough, we just can't afford doing it.
Yeah. So I was just curious, in terms of making these tiles or whatever they are the materials that go into these tiles, are any of them ones that are going to be a depletion in some way from our environment, or they're what do they call earth-rich,
Rare
earth chemicals, or like what about that side?
This is exactly why at the point you started, we could only get 2 out of those 3. For catalysts, for instance, to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, we had proven technology from electrolyzers that could do that with platinum or iridium dioxide. But we can't get them to scale because they're not earth abundant enough to make a large amount of fuel. And so we had to replace those materials and had to discover materials that didn't function as well, but function as well as we needed them to in our implementation in order to be able to get to scale. And we've made several important breakthroughs in the last 3 years in JCAP. One of them is replacing the platinum, and we've done that functionally. And we actually have also developed earth-abundant materials for the light absorbers. And so we've shown that we actually have there is a route to build this in a sustainable way that would scale and not deplete valuable elements.
So we have time for one more question.
The system that you're describing requires the inputs of sunlight and water. Given the scarcity of water in many parts of the world, especially fresh water, I'm wondering, is this capable of working with salt water or say gray water, etc.?
Probably, but I think the question is a little misguided because we actually can use water vapor from the air and even rainwater. And it's not like heating, cooling water in a tower, because the water demand is much, much lower when you're making it directly into fuel. So when one does the calculation of the amount of water needed, except in the driest desert, you have plenty of humidity and rainwater to naturally supply any flux you'd need for cities or anything reasonable for energy demand. Water is important. We might well want to be using seawater, but we have to purify the seawater in order to feed it into the system. And it would be better to just rely on the natural fluxes of the planet on which we live.
I have a quick question. I'm an architect, and we all know that a lot of the carbon footprint comes from buildings. And I want to know what you think about passive solar design, which is incorporated within the building design with building elements such as strong walls or walls of thermal mass, and that store the energy of the sun through the day to radiate it in the evening, and can be used in association with active solar technologies. But I think there isn't this discussion in the solar industry. I don't know why.
Okay, well, we're beyond our time, but this falls under the general area of, first of all, it's a great idea, it's a no-brainer, and it's up there with energy efficiency and changing our light bulbs and driving hybrid vehicles and doing everything we can on the demand side to reduce demand so that we can make supply meet demand. And if we don't do that, we have no hope of generating enough to make ends meet in a carbon neutral way. So the first thing on everybody's agenda should be to do those things that we know how to do now to help us make the arithmetic work out so that the supply problem is challenging but not impossible. That doesn't mean that we can't solve the supply problem. It does mean that first things first, and we've got to be doing all of those things that you talk about like our lives depend on.